So let's get started. So what I want to do this hour is I want to talk to you about DAG protocols. And so DAGs are not something that revolutionary in themselves. I just want to give you this design pattern for general protocols. Okay, so somehow for me, so what you've heard from Itai in the talks that he gave earlier in the week is maybe a lot about how to reconcile traditional consensus protocols with what we see in the Nakamoto consensus, and sometimes about hybrid protocols that took Nakamoto's consensus and added classical Byzantine fault-tolerant protocols that we already knew and kind of reduced the problem back to something that we know how to solve, which is a great thing. But for me, DAG protocols are a different way of looking at proof of work, this primitive, and trying to understand what it does. What is the basic functionality that it provides? So I want to start maybe by giving you some intuitions on why this design pattern of DAGs is useful, and it just gives a wider design space for protocols in general. And I should say that I did find in the literature classical Byzantine fault-tolerant protocols that were based on DAGs. This is before the Nakamoto consensus. So we never claim to have made a really big invention here. Just I think we wanted to understand how it works in the Nakamoto consensus world. And this is work that was mostly done with my student Jonathan Sompolinsky, who's now started a company to actually implement one of these protocols, and Yoad Levenberg, who was another PhD student at Hebrew U. But mostly, I think Jonathan's work here. So what I want to talk about is first, we have this notion of a blockchain, right? Every block contains a hash of a single predecessor. So we get structures like this, and when a miner sees a blockchain like this, right, he actually receives messages about some of these blocks. Maybe he heard about this one, and did not yet hear about that one. And we're asking the miner now to choose where to point, whether he extends this branch or that branch. So there's a principle that actually comes from economics that's called direct revelation. And the principle basically says any mechanism that you do that requests the agent to choose or to withhold some information and make a choice here, you could just implement it by asking the agent to give you all of the information, and then have the mechanism itself do the decision later. So in some sense, what I want to do is I want the miner to report both of these, and I could later look at this structure and say, okay, he saw these two blocks. I can make the choice afterwards, after the fact. So this was the longest chain, or that was the longest chain. So if he just says to me, these are all the blocks that I knew at the time. So I can just implement everything that I did before by just having him reveal all the information. And maybe there's a wider space of mechanisms that I can do. So in the context of economics, the direct revelation mechanisms are actually known to right? There's basically a kind of a theorem saying, if you can implement something when the agents give you partial information, you can obtain the exact same result by them giving you all the information. Then the mechanism weeds out and forgets whatever it wants. It uses or it doesn't use anything. So it's a very simple principle. And so what you end up with, every time somebody builds a block, you ask them to point to all of the tips of this direct acyclic graph that you get. You get this sort of structure that kind of grows. You can have links going in all sorts of directions. Maybe this block pointed here, it was only heard of by that creator, so it was either withheld or we don't know, right? So we get this structure. And now we can still do, if we wanted to do Nakamoto's longest chain protocol, we can still do it. Now right, for each block, we can see what is the longest chain that it would have seen, right? This would have seen that as the genesis block. This guy also saw that, and so on. This would have said, this is my longest chain. This guy said that. He maybe saw this, and this one, when he's considering two chains, would have said this is the longest chain, and so on. We can say, here's the longest chain, right? That's it. We can say this is our ledger, do everything we did up until now. So just adding these extra links doesn't detract from our power, it actually adds to it. So this is the basic notion of what we were thinking. And really, if you think about what does a block DAG give you, it gives you a causal order between these events, right? You know that if a block contains the hash of another one, it must have come after it in time. So there are things that came provably, this came before this, because otherwise I couldn't have stored a hash of that block. And there are things that are incomparable. I don't know which one of these came first. But this miner, he says, when I heard about this, I also knew at the time of block creation of this event, I knew about both of these. So he just holds in his header, instead of one hash, he puts two, right?
One hash within circles.
So cycles don't occur because, well, at least we hope they don't occur, because that would mean some block knew in advance what the hash of a future block would be, right? A cryptographic hash. So that would mean, you hope to have one-wayness and collision resistance and all the nice things that hashes should give us.
Can you compute the consistency of the transactions of both?
Yeah, so that's a good question. What do we do with this? And what do we do with these other blocks, and how do we use them? But all I wanted to say is that this is like the basic idea. Give us more information. So here, if we were doing the Nakamoto consensus, I would tell you, look at the longest chain in the DAG, throw every other block out, and that's a consistent set of transactions, of blocks, and that's the ledger. So right? That's the Nakamoto.
Do you pay, does the miner that has two arrows, does double the work of mining?
No.
No.
Mining is just same difficulty. He just reported more stuff.
But he has to find the corresponding hash with a number of zero sets.
Yeah.
Nakamoto.
Everybody who created a block has to create a corresponding set.
But it has to be good only for one of the hashes? Or
no, so it's for his header. He takes his header that contains these previous pointers, right? And he tries to add a nonce to that hashes the block to a small number.
And if there is a double spend between these two concurrent nodes?
So if we are doing the Nakamoto protocol here, the double spend between these two, this is not the longest chain. It's thrown out.
So he already decides to ignore it.
He could have ignored it if this was the Nakamoto protocol, but I say, just give us this information, right? This is Nakamoto consensus. I didn't give a new protocol yet. I'm just saying this data structure can encode the old protocol. Up until now, I didn't do anything new. Yeah?
Doesn't it encourage forks and waste of computation power?
No, if you don't get paid, if you're doing the Nakamoto consensus, this guy doesn't get paid, this guy doesn't get paid. Right? So if everybody was transmitting their blocks instantly, like Nakamoto's analysis originally assumes, this wouldn't be a DAG, this would just be a chain, right? Because when these guys create blocks, one of them would have heard about the other, they would have pointed to it, right? Unless one of them is malicious, which is a double spend attack on the network. Right? So all I did here is whenever this guy was supposed to point to the longest chain and ignore that part, I told him, don't ignore it, just tell me what it was. We might throw it out later. So when we think about the ledger, this is the ledger, and we throw this after the fact, right? When I look at this data structure, I say the longest chain is the ledger, and the rest is off.
So you're saying, so far you didn't say we change the algorithm.
Nothing.
Let's just add information to the block.
Add information. I'm going to start changing the algorithm, but I just want you to understand that there's nothing earth-shaking that went on when we switched to a DAG. It just gives us more information. Now I'm going to start changing the protocol and somehow making it live within this DAG.
The set of transactions you choose in the new block should take into consideration the compatibility with both the previous blocks.
Yes, there has to be some rule. We'll talk about this. How do you choose the transactions in the next block? But so I'm going to still stick with the Nakamoto consensus. And so I think the first DAG protocol, we had two papers that came out at the same time in financial cryptography in 2014. So which I think of, I think these were the first DAG protocols.
But if you already choose the longest chain, why partial order, why don't we agree on How linearize the partial?
This is what we're going to get to. We're going to get to linearizing partial orders, exactly. But the first thing we wanted to do, like our first dumb idea, was we have these transactions these blocks that are thrown out, that you throw out. You're supposed, right? You took the longest chain. That's all you had. Now we can linearize based on the chain. Okay, one way to linearize the partial order is to say the main chain decides the order. We're going to include the contents of blocks that were cast aside. And the way to linearize them is just in the order that the chain discovers them in some sense. So this is the first block. This is, right, the chain here says this is the second block, but I discovered this at this point in time. Right, so this is block 2b, that's the next block in line. Then I show up. Then block number 4, right? Then block number 5. So this actually needs to be, this needs to be 4b. So 5 finds 4 and then 4b. That's a typo. Right, so all right, I'm sorry, that's just numbering for the height. And so we're going to think of this as a chain that just has extra payload that's attached to it. And what do we do with transactions? There might be conflicting transactions between these two blocks. So we've linearized them. So we say this guy shows up first. If he gave a transaction and there's a conflicting one here, this one is we just throw out the single transaction. We don't have to eliminate the whole block. Just this transaction couldn't have taken place because we had some double spend earlier. And anything else that doesn't conflict, we just add. So 3a discovered this part. You can think of an appendix to 3a's contents that says, I also do everything that 2b included that isn't conflicting the past. Right? That's all I did. So I included blocks, the transactions from these blocks that I could without violating the fact that this was done first. Okay, that's a very simple idea.
But if this was a true Nakamoto consensus, then these discarded blocks would have reappeared in later blocks. It's not that there will be people would.
But I already spent time sending them and bandwidth.
So this is already a change to the protocol.
Yes, this is now, I'm now changing the protocol. So we call this inclusive blockchain protocols. So the chain selection is still Nakamoto's consensus, but I'm doing something with the payload, with what is the ledger. I'm adopting transactions in these blocks. Yeah.
If 2b has a conflict with 4, would you throw 2b out or would you throw 4?
I don't. I throw a transaction that has a conflict only.
Yeah, but
So
which transaction?
so 4 already saw 2b. He should have known not to have a conflict. So I would throw 4. Right? This guy, by putting a hash here, said I already have this block and all of its predecessors. That's the rule. You don't put a hash to something unless you have the contents in its past. And so he already knows that the ledger contains 2b here when he's created.
If he has to choose between 2a and 2b, if there are two way 2b conflicting.
So 3a has to choose somehow between them. So maybe the order in which he puts the hashes chooses if there's a tie in length of chain, right? So you break ties somehow. You say, this is the block I heard about first, and this is the block I heard about second. So you write the arrow here first in the list, and this is second in the list. I mean, you break ties arbitrarily. It doesn't really matter. Yeah?
If there is a conflict on the transaction between 2a and 2b, you drop only the bad transaction, but you accept the rest of the other.
Yes.
So it gives an incentive to a miner from time to time to put a double spend transaction, and my block would be still accepted, and I will get a fee on the other transaction.
Yeah, but your double spend doesn't work.
Yeah, but
Because anybody who looks at the chain,
that's fine, but I'm working very hard on that block, and I say,
Sure.
okay, maybe this. I mean, it's not like a Nakamoto reasoning that says if I'm putting one bad transaction, the entire block is
Right.
going to be dropped.
but there's no reason to drop the entire block if there's one bad transaction in it. Why do we need to do that? It doesn't give us more security to do it. So if you think of an attack, you actually reason about an attack. Somebody sees his transaction and it's deep enough in the chain, and now you need to swap it out. It's still the same security property because the security is based on the fact that we choose the longest chain. So this is still not a scalable protocol, but this is just a small alteration.
But didn't you increase the block size?
No, this is all 1 megabyte blocks.
But now that you have adopted that other guy,
I don't retransmit it. I just include the hash of that previous block. it was already transmitted, it was propagated in the network, everybody heard about it. Now I just say I saw this, and I want to include the payload. So that's a new rule for what the ledger is. Yeah?
But you are more applying to the content is transaction of Bitcoin. And if we want to think of it as an underlying structure for some blockchain,
Yeah?
you don't give the interpretations that the blockchain is consensus, and it may be.
No, I linearized something. If there are two things that commute, you can accept them, right? If things don't commute, you take the first one and you throw the second one. Or you order them in the sense that, so I just linearized it, right? I just gave a linear order based on the chain. So you can do what, with the linear order on the blocks, you can do whatever you want.
Yeah,
I did something very simple.
So you have to show it that if two nodes have two different views, then they will end up with a compatible order.
As long as they agree on what the chain is, right? The longest chain is, that structure was based on the chain, right? This linearization is fully dependent on the chain. So if we agree on the longest chain, which we do in the Nakamoto consensus, we agree on the linearization of everything. That's it. So I want to go a little bit faster, but I'll take one more question, yeah?
This rule that you only throw the invalid transaction, you generate it for all blocks. If there's a conflict between 2A and 1, is 2A still valid as a block? And you only throw the...
Yeah, so you could do that if you wanted. It's just kind of silly to do it, because when 2A is created, it knows that 1 has a conflict. And so why do we waste space in the block to write a conflicting transaction? You can think of Bitcoin's longest chain. What happened if I included a transaction and in the next block a conflicting transaction? You could have read the blocks from start to finish, and you know the second one is conflicting, and you erase it. But then why bother to send it in the first place? So Bitcoin erases it, it just doesn't include it in the ledger. A linear order is enough, even if you do have conflicts within the blocks that follow each other. Ordering the blocks is sufficient to get everything we want. So this is a very important lesson. I think people from the front row here probably knows it better than me. If you linearize this causal order, you have everything you want. You don't need to take care of conflicts in advance. When everybody agrees on the order, they can read it according to the order, and they resolve the conflict in exactly the same way. So they see a transaction, then they see a double spend, they throw it out. And everybody has the same linear order, so we are all okay. Yeah.
How can you throw away double spend transactions if the hash of 2B depends on one double spend?
When I say throw away, I just mean it's not in the UTXO set. I don't consider it a transaction that was accepted. I reject it. I mark it as did not take place. It's in the record, but actually I put a small mark X next to it.
All transactions in 2B, we don't consider them as having happened.
Some of them happened if they weren't conflicting with the past. If they were conflicting with the past, we would just make a note of it and say, actually, that didn't happen. Okay, that's all.
And the hash also depends on this.
Yes, sure.
You have any comment about the reward for 2B?
I didn't talk about rewards. Yes, I will talk about rewards. This is the next slide. So rewards are actually. So maybe I'll talk about why I need to talk about rewards. If you do the Nakamoto consensus, what is the contents of 2A and 2B? How different is it? Naively, it's exactly the same, right? Everybody takes the top, the highest paying transactions in the mempool, and they put it in here, and they put it in here. So why am I bothering including both the contents of here and here if it's nearly the same? I mean, that doesn't give us anything. So this is where we want to talk about rewards, and I want to argue that it's not going to be the same if we think about the rewards. So here's how we do rewards. If you are 2B, we're going to give you all of the rewards for the non-conflicting transactions. So you get the fees. Any transaction that you helped enter into the blockchain, you're going to get the fees for it. And I'm going to give you a full block reward, everything. Like you get the 50 bitcoins that you printed when you created the block. But I condition this on one thing. This gap between where you point to the chain and where the chain points to you cannot be too large. So there's a parameter here. If you withhold your block too long, I'm not going to give you the reward. Okay, that's my condition. And I want to show you that this makes miners do something that actually increases the throughput. That the contents here and here are not going to be the same. Okay, so what's the argument? So let's say I'm a miner, I'm one of these guys. I know that the block creation rate in the network is really high. So there's a lot of, I expect that sometimes I'm going to create a block and it'll be in the chain. Sometimes I'm going to create a block and it'll be off chain. Now I know in this, maybe I have a 50-50 chance of that or something like that. I have some statistics over this. Now, if I know that sometimes I'm off the chain, I know that if I included a transaction that this guy had, I'm not going to get paid. He got paid. He shows up before me. And if I included a transaction he doesn't have, I get paid anyway, right? So what we have in the paper that does this is basically game theoretic analysis. And we show the basic idea. We do this for a variety of solution concepts. It's always the same. What you want to do as a miner, you take your mempool and you randomize over transactions that you want to include. And you randomize in a way that tries to avoid the other, right? You try to have few collisions as possible with the other guy. And you weigh your randomization based on the fees that you're going to get paid. So let's say like the top 1 megabyte of transactions would pay you fee X. If you go just below the top, maybe you get X minus epsilon in fees, but there's, right, if the other guy is just choosing transactions from the top, you have a probability 1 of getting paid for that transaction, so it's worth it. If you were to take a transaction from the top 1 megabyte, you have a probability half of maybe not getting paid for it, because you might be the miner whose block is off the chain. So we basically show that you do get higher throughput with this. And more than that, transactions that pay more are likely to appear, more likely to appear in both blocks that are conflicting, or more if there are more. But in some sense, they paid more. They paid for bandwidth on both blocks. They paid for more space. So there you get kind of a quality of service.
But you put this in equilibrium?
Yes, so we have an equilibrium. We can show it's a form of a Nash equilibrium, or there are a lot of and safety level equilibrium. So if you want to make sure that you're not getting attacked by other miners and so on, so we can give you different. There's slightly different randomization, but we basically can say the best thing is no longer to pick just the top transactions, because then if everybody does it, that's not an equilibrium. Everybody starts to collide.
No, but everybody does the protocol and I'm the rational agent. I will.
No, so the idea is to encode in the protocol the Nash equilibrium. And then if I'm the rational agent, I don't deviate, and neither does anyone else. Right? So when you rewrite the protocol, you change the way they select transactions into the block as well. And then nobody will want to deviate. Okay, so and we have higher throughput, so everybody's also happy. Yeah.
So if the same transaction is included in both blocks 2A and 2B, who gets the reward?
The one that actually is in the chain. So the one that appeared first in the linearization. So 2A is on the chain and 2B is not. So he is first on the linearization and he gets the money and this guy doesn't, if it's the same transaction.
The transactions equal the transactions which are not in 2A.
Exactly. So he tries to avoid 2A without knowing what 2A is going to build. So this is just a basic idea, right? We didn't do anything with the protocol, just the payload, and hopefully this helps us with something in bandwidth. And if you think about it, we have a block propagation problem, and especially we're not going to, right? We want to be able to create payloads and transmit them in parallel, and to actually get something out of it. So this is in some sense a nice thing.
Miners get paid for creating a block. They get like 1 extra Bitcoin. If you pay 2A and 2B, would you end up with more Bitcoins that you should at the end?
No, you have a block creation rate that throttles the rate at which money is printed, right? You still, so if you pay all block rewards to everybody, that doesn't mean you're off schedule. You just need to make sure that you adjust for blocks that are off the chain as well. So actually, this is exactly what Ethereum is doing. Ethereum is paying uncles. What is an uncle, right? So if we go back for a second, what's an uncle? Right, this is my parent block. This is my uncle, right? He's the brother of my father, right? In some sense. So Ethereum, when they say we pay for uncles, they actually give the block reward to this guy. And the reason Ethereum does this is because Vitalik was talking to us about the protocol, and that's what they decided to do. They actually said they're going to do the Ghost protocol, which is another protocol of ours, but I think they got confused and did this instead. So this is kind of funny, but. Yeah, They don't include the payloads. Yeah. So they do some version of it. It's still good to pay the uncles for other reasons. It helps with the reward distribution that's skewed, that we talked about in the last hour. The miners who are not as fast to distribute their block can still get paid, and they don't lose as much to well-connected miners. So there's a whole argument about this in the paper. I don't want to go into that too much. Sorry? Why should they? Because that's how we define the protocol. Why not? Why not pointed uncles?
When you talk
Because
about
they need to check, you need to do this minimization and to check, remove transactions, see that it's consistent.
Sure, but that's not a lot of work compared to the proof of work. I don't know. I think there's no issue there. But you're right. We could think of ways to incentivize pointing at uncles as well. But I don't see a strong disincentive to do it.
Doesn't that mean that you share the reward with the uncles who may have been the source of some other miner?
Sorry?
If you point to an uncle, that means that uncle gets a reward.
Yeah.
But if that miner comes from a different, if somebody else, some other miner produced that block, you're giving that person money, maybe you don't want to.
So if you're rational, you don't care that other people are getting paid. You care about what you get paid, right? Maybe. Sure. So you can ask Ethereum miners. They pay uncles currently. Do they play with pointing to uncles? I don't think they do. I don't think they do that. They do get paid for including uncles. So of course you could do this sort of scheme where every time you point to an uncle, I give you a little share of his rewards. But it starts. So we start to get into this murky territory of how do we analyze this? Is there better attack incentives? What I really wanted to show here is mostly that the randomization of stuff that goes into the blocks, and the other thing that maybe is important, another concept here that's important, is this concept of a gap, because the reason that this comes in is because you can think of an attempted double spend, somebody who tries to double spend. If he could double spend and then publish his blocks and get paid for get the block reward for including them, you could do attacks and you actually get paid for. You fail, you didn't succeed in the double spend, but you still publish your blocks and you still get paid. So we wanted to somehow still hurt miners that do the attacks. So this is why we restrict the gap that you're allowed to withhold this. So this does make attacks slightly more profitable. You compensate for this by waiting a little bit longer on the chain. So there's no free lunch here. If you give these guys money to be as secure or to have attackers pay as much as before, you need to wait slightly longer for more confirmations to inflict the same damage on them, in some sense. Yeah.
So 3A, let's say that 2B has a lot of really Python transactions.
Yeah.
If I was 3A and I was rational, then I would say, I won't point to 2B, I will take these high-paying transactions and put them into my own block to get the free.
You could do that currently with Bitcoin. There are arguments that say, right?
If it's a mass equilibrium, right, you have to, like, if I'm just rational 3A, then I will
Yes.
then I'll say, okay, I won't have 2B.
So I'm working here under the assumption, and this you might argue with the assumption, and the assumption is that we are at a high TPS point in time, right? We have a bandwidth problem. If we don't have a bandwidth problem, we can keep Nakamoto's chain as it is, and you're happy. But I'm assuming we have a bandwidth problem. There's a backlog of transactions that's waiting to get in. So I don't need to go and steal transactions from your block unless I'm doing some selfish mining attack, which we can also discuss. I have a mempool of 350 megabytes of transactions that I can get that just gives me alternative payments, right? So why should I try to double spend your block? It means that I risk my rewards. Maybe you'll get extended and I don't. And all of that to steal a little bit of money that I can get anyway from new transactions and fresh transactions. So if you want to deal with the incentives here, there's a whole argument to be made. I want to actually move forward because I want to go on to better protocols. So this protocol is still the Nakamoto's longest chain. So it's still bad in the sense that it doesn't scale well because its security decreases, as we saw in the last hour. We start to have a collapse if we have blocks that are too large or too frequent. So we can still suffer from double spends. Maybe our throughput is somewhat increased, but we still don't have better security. So I'm actually not going to have enough time to do everything that I wanted to do. But so we had this insight. I think Itai started saying that basically we had the one CPU, one vote rule in Bitcoin. So you can look at Bitcoin as a sort of something that does voting, right? And one interpretation is that when you look at the Nakamoto consensus and you see something like this, you see a structure, a tree of blocks like this, and you have to decide what is the history that I prefer. You can think of each block as having cast a vote. So the block D, I'm going to say, cast a vote in favor of every chain that passes through it, and against, in some sense, every chain that did not. Right? So you can think of it as a voting rule. And now there are all the chains in the world, right? All the chains that appear as subsets of this DAG, like AD, ADE, ADEF. And we can just say every block added one vote to every chain that it includes it. And so which is the chain with the highest number of votes? When every block votes for the chain that includes it? The longest chain has the most votes, right? Because it got a vote from each one of these. And right, the chain length is the number of votes. That's just another way of saying longest chain. I didn't do anything fancy here. But it's something that we know about. We know a lot about voting rules and how to do them well. So maybe I'll show you this, and then we'll try to skip to an advanced protocol. So let's say you are trying to choose between the Republicans and the Democrats, right? You're voting for president. So there's something about voting rules that's called, there's a property of voting rules that's called cloning and being clone proof. So cloning is basically, let's say the Republicans decided to nominate, instead of running one guy for the Republican Party, they said we're going to have two candidates, right? So Trump and Cruz, and you kind of can guess, I guess, what this does. If you have a bunch of voters, 3 voters that prefer Democratic candidates to Republicans, and 4 that prefer Republicans to Democrats, right? The Republicans are supposed to win here. There are 4 people who prefer Republicans to Democrats, but because we split the votes of the Republican Party, right? Maybe these 3 guys who like Democrats are all going to vote for Clinton over Trump and Cruz, but the Republican vote, 2 of them might like Trump more, and 2 are going to like Cruz. If what they cast in the ballot is this, then this candidate might win the elections, right? So because the Republican vote was split between 2 candidates, right? That could have happened if they, right, in an alternate universe, and Clinton would have won, right? It didn't. So this is a property of voting rules that says basically the plurality voting rule, which is the voting rule where you vote for your top candidate, is not clone proof. If you split the votes, it doesn't work. And you might ask, what the hell does this have to do with blockchains? And I can give you this. This is my picture. So let's suppose we have a bunch of honest participants creating blocks and transmitting them to each other. And some of them, right, are pointing to each other. They've heard of each other's blocks. So we think of these as the honest participants. They're not able to build a long chain and agree on one history, but they've still been talking to each other. They're still somehow in agreement. And when we look at the longest chain protocol, we can think of this as this chain has 4 votes, while we actually had a large component of nodes communicating with each other, and they would have preferred to say the history, the next block after the genesis should be one of these, right? Either Trump or Cruz. But because we've kind of split our weight, if we're doing the Nakamoto protocol, this guy would have had a chain of length 3 or after the genesis, and this one would have had a chain of length 3, and we would have had 4 here. So now Clinton wins, while everybody somehow preferred these guys, one of these guys. Right? So in some sense, for me, coming with a little bit of background in voting theory, this stuck out. And we're trying to think of how to do different ways to vote in consensus protocols. So what I'm going to try and do is I'm going to skip some more of the insights that I wanted to give. I'm going to try and explain a protocol that does linearization. And what I want to try and show is that you can actually scale to higher block rates and maintain security. Right? So maybe the place to start is with the Bitcoin consensus protocol. Right? So let's recall what Nakamoto did. So you're supposed to mine blocks that point to the longest chain in the Nakamoto consensus, and you're supposed to publish them immediately. That's like the basic rule. And we have security assumptions that half of the hash rate or more is honest, and that we have block propagation which is much, much faster than time between blocks. And then what we're supposed to do is we look at the longest chain. We say the longest chain is the set of transactions, and the result is that this set of transactions is robust, it doesn't change. So the reason I wrote this here is because I want to sketch the differences. So we have that this assumption breaks when we are at scale. When blocks are larger, this doesn't work anymore. And that's the reason that Nakamoto consensus kind of starts to fail, the result. So we're going to make some changes. Instead of pointing to the tips of the longest chain, we're going to use a DAG. You're supposed to point to the tips of the DAG. You're still going to mine the same way, everything we talked about, right? You publish blocks immediately. We need half of the honest hash rate to be legit. Instead of picking the longest chain, we're just going to pick another thing in the DAG that I call the largest K cluster. I'm going to show you what that is. And then I'm still going to have a transaction set that I pick from this K cluster that doesn't change with high probability. So I'm going to have a result of the same flavor as Bitcoin. The difference is that we're going to have another parameter in the protocol that's going to account for the block propagation time. It's going to tolerate some forks in the chain from the Nakamoto consensus protocol's point of view. And we're going to pay. It's going to cost us in the amount of time we have to wait for transactions to be finally accepted. Right? So this is what we're going to get. Right? So there's no free lunch here. We're going to get that the security of the protocol no longer collapses if we instantiate the protocol with the right parameters, but it's going to cost us latency, right? Time until transactions are irreversible. So let me describe the protocol basically. Right? Our goal is to get an ordering of blocks from the DAG. And I need some terminology first before we can start to talk. So whenever I have a block, and I look at all the things that are reachable through hash links from that block, I call that the past of the block. Right? Everything that is known to be before it in the causal order. And everything that comes after is the future of the block. Right? Everything that we know that follows it. And there are all these incomparable events that we don't know how to say. So if you know a little bit of relativity, this is the cone of causality in Einstein's relativity. So we decided to call the rest the anticone, the complement of the cone. So anticone are basically blocks that are uncomparable to you. They're not in your past, they're not in your future. We need to somehow decide where they are relative to you in the order if we want to linearize. So now the intuition of the protocol is to ask, how do two honest blocks, what do they look like? How do honest players behave? So suppose B1 and B2 are created by two honest participants roughly at the same time. So how do we know that? So if there was an oracle somewhere in the sky that tells us these are the honest guys right here, what do we expect to see about them? We expect to see that because they transmit their block as fast as they can to each other, and because they point at the most recent blocks, that was the definition of the protocol, we expect them to have a small number of other honest blocks in their anticone. So if somebody out there told me these are the blocks created by honest participants, and I look at what's in their past and what's in their future, the anticone is going to be small. Right? So that's some property. If you look at the bad guys might do one of two things. Either they don't point to the most recent blocks, or they don't publish their blocks as fast as possible. They deviate from the protocol. So if you look at them, they might have, they don't necessarily have, but they might have a large anticone. So if you look at this block, it points to here, and it is only discovered by that block here, eventually. So all of these are in its anticone, right? It has a large anticone. So this motivated us to define something called the K-cluster. So a K-cluster, or you can think of it as a K-chain, sometimes Jonathan likes to call it that name, is just a set of blocks that when you look at their anticone from within that set, right, intersecting with the set of blocks C, so that their anticone in the blockchain and that from within that set is smaller than K. So internally, they look like an internally consistent set of good guys. They don't have too many inconsistencies, incomparable blocks between themselves, because they were supposedly transmitting to each other fast. So let me kind of give an example for this definition. This is a one cluster, a K cluster, right, with 1 as K, because every block in this set has at most one block in its anticone from within the set. Okay, so is that definition clear? Okay, so here's a 2 cluster, for example, because this block has 2 in its anticone. That's a 2 cluster. And no block has more than 2. And so one interesting thing to notice is what is a 0 cluster? A 0 cluster is a chain. So the protocol that I'm going to give you, if you just instantiate K to 0, it's just going to be the longest chain protocol. I'm going to give a protocol that exactly collapses back to the Nakamoto consensus under some parameters. It's just a generalization of Nakamoto's consensus. The way to think about a K cluster, a 2 cluster, it's like a chain that I allow it to be slightly thicker, of thickness 2 in some sense. So that's just a generalization of the protocol. And so here's something that we call the phantom protocol. It's very simple. Pick the maximal weight K cluster in the DAG. Right? So this is akin to picking the longest chain. If this was a 0 cluster, this would be the longest chain. Because this is like, if it's a 2 cluster, it's a thickness 2 kind of chain. Weight is based on difficulty of proof of work. But you can think of number of blocks for abstraction. And then you sort it topologically in a canonical way. You get the topological sort of that set. It doesn't matter what the topological sort exactly is, as long as it's everybody who has the same structure would do the same sort. And that's it. You're done. That's a linearization of the causal order.
What is the complexity of getting the K cluster?
Oh, that's an awesome question. You know, so first, it's an awesome question because it's my next slide. As you all know, great questions are always the ones that are in the next slide. So let me say 2 things before I answer that, Eli. One is this is supposed to contain most of the honest blocks if K was set well. Right? If you think about it, we have the largest set of a K cluster, right? If you think of the honest participants, they get their blocks to each other really quickly. They have more than 50% of the weight. That's our assumption for security of the protocol. So what we actually can prove is that it will contain most, but not all of the honest blocks. And that the K cluster, once you're in it, the probability that you are thrown out, right, basically our security, decreases exponentially as this structure keeps growing. So you can think of if you can think of this proof with K equals 0, this is exactly the analysis of Nakamoto's consensus protocol. So here's the problem that Eli is interested in. It's generally hard, it's NP hard to find a maximum K cluster in a DAG, unfortunately. There's a result, somebody reduced it to some other NP complete problem. So what we really do in practice, we have a greedy algorithm to select a K cluster that builds a pretty good one. It's not going to be the maximal K cluster in the graph. And what we actually do in the paper, we show that this greedy algorithm has the same properties. We actually prove the result for the greedy algorithm and not for the original one. The idea behind the original one, the reason I show it is just for purpose of explaining the greedy one. because the thing that guided us was to say this is a group of guys that looks like good guys. This is maybe there's another group of guys that look like good guys that have a one cluster here. And the way we choose between them is by picking the largest one, right? We think of the one that's largest as being the good guys because we know we have an assumption that they're over 50% of the network. So they should have created more blocks. Yeah. So I want K to be large enough so that I account for the anticones of honest participants. If I set it to be too large, it's going to cause, I'm going to have to wait more time to get transactions confirmed.
Why do you need to set it? Why don't you go from 0 upwards when you find some K?
So it's hard to say what's K that works and what is the linear order. It's problematic. We can talk about it later. It's an interesting point that you bring up. We've thought about it. So here's the greedy protocol. We're just going to build the K cluster by going along the DAG. You inherit the K cluster from one of your predecessors. And you add blocks greedily to the K cluster. So let me give an example of what I mean. Let's suppose I'm this block. My predecessors each have a K cluster that in mind, in some sense, this one or this one. And I inherit one of my predecessor's K clusters. So I pick the largest K cluster as the thing I inherit from my predecessor. So these are tied, so I break the tie somehow arbitrarily. Doesn't really matter, they're of the same size. Maybe I pick this one to extend. And then I try to extend it. So I add myself as the block. And I try to add anything that is in the anticone here that doesn't violate the K cluster property. So this is still a one cluster. This used to be a one cluster. I add myself, and I figure out that I can add this block, and it's still a one cluster because this new set is going to have this one cluster property. Right, so that gives me things that cannot be added. Like this one, this block here couldn't be added because its anticone from the set is too large. And then you keep doing that onwards. So this block might be considering 2 K clusters from its predecessors. There's 7 blocks in this one and 5 blocks in this one. And we inherit that one. And we can't extend it by adding anything else. Any one of these blocks, if you try to add it to the set, would have an anticone that's too large from the set. So it would violate the one cluster property. So this ends up sorry?
Bring the other
So bring it back here.
Why this could not have the other one include this one too?
If you include it here, he would have an anticone of 2. He points here and is pointed by this. So these two are in its anticone. It's a one cluster. You're allowed to have one in your anticone. One from the set. So the green set, this happens to be a 0 cluster as well in this case. But there isn't a single block that you would add to the green set that maintains the one cluster property. So you're allowed to have one in your anticone, but not 2. So this, if you add it, would have 2 from the set. This is, sorry?
Is it deterministic?
Yes, so this is deterministic.
I don't see it too, but anyway.
So if you look at its future, the future starts here for it. This is not in his future, and this is not in his future. Right? This block doesn't have these 2 in their future. And they're not in his past either. Right? So they're in his anticone.
But it was not, it's just the anticone.
The anticone is everything that's not in your future and not in your past. Right? That's the definition. So we end up with this. And then what do? We need to, so I said we need to linearize, we need to do some topological sort. So we do basically something like this. Right? We do some topological sort that's canonical. Everybody who would look at this would say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And if somebody else looks at a prefix, would still topologically sort the same way. You just do a BFS and you break ties deterministically somehow. So what we could do is we linearize this part. We could also do like an inclusive version of the protocol, and we can also include this later, like with lower priority, but I'm not going to talk about that. That's not important. So maybe what I want to do about the protocol is kind of give you intuition on the double spends. Why does it work against double spending? So let's suppose we have a one cluster protocol. This is what we see, and my transaction is here. So there's already weight built on top of it, and I want to be sure that nobody double spends. What could the attacker do? So the attacker might have done something like this. The double spend could have appeared here, right? And this actually makes it into my one cluster. So, but I want you to think about when I knew about the double spend. This block has a very small anticone, which means it was published very quickly. So when I was waiting to see if I got money, I was actually aware of this double spend. And it was linearized in some way. When we said this is the one cluster, there's a linear order that was determined by doing topological sort on this. So I knew very quickly which one of these transactions wins. And as long as the one cluster doesn't change, this stays the same. So this isn't really a successful attack. It didn't appear out of the blue after I already built a one cluster. So what you should consider in terms of attack is something that I see this, and suddenly, after I waited a while, some new set of block appears with a double spend. Nobody knew about it. It appeared, that means there are no arrows from honest nodes to any of these. This was mined in secret in some sense. And now, if you think about it, these can't be accepted into this one cluster. They have an anticone that's too large. On the other hand, they do make up a one cluster of their own, but since this was mined by the attacker, it has fewer blocks than the rest of the network mined during the same period of time. So this is a block race between the network and the attacker, just like in the Nakamoto consensus. It's not different, and this is how you analyze it. So you can think of this as the longest chain. If this was a zero cluster, this would be a longer chain than the attacker, and the miner here would have had to decide between a long chain and a short one. So this is a double spend that's not successful. So, yeah.
What happens when the attacker has 49%?
So you just need to wait a long time, just like you do in the Nakamoto consensus. The higher, right? So the number of confirmations you need to wait to be secure depends on the size of the attacker, right? Essentially, you need to make sure that enough time passes that you win block races. So I remind you that if this is what I saw, let's assume this is long, this is a year of blocks after my transactions, anything that appears out of the blue that's not pointed to by the network is going to have a huge anticone.
Sure. I'm not worried about that case.
Yeah.
I'm worried about the persistent 49% attacker who's keeping two of these graphs going.
Yeah.
And,
that's a great question. We could talk about it. We could try to draw some stuff. It's nuanced, but we've covered. So we have proofs for this, not just the intuition. So I won't go into more than that. So that's it. I guess I'm out of time. I'll stop right here. If you want to ask me more questions about the protocol or see the paper, there is one. There are also some nice properties with respect to selfish mining. You can find the paper on a ICR ePrint thus far. And thank you. We got a break, I guess, or not.
3-minute break.
Okay, let's do 3 minutes. Thank you all.